The funeral flowers hadn't yet completely fallen and lost their heavy scent, which strangely mingled with the stagnant air in the house. And the phone calls no longer left me alone, as if the world in which I was left alone had suddenly decided to remind me that life goes on, but without Leon. On Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the funeral, I stood in the kitchen, staring at my coffee, which was still steaming, and this unfinished drink seemed to mockingly reproach me for no longer finding the strength for even the simplest movements. My hands clutched the ceramic mug that Laura, my granddaughter, had once given me, and on it was written that I was the best grandmother in the world. Only now this inscription cut into my eyes like a lie, because in my hands it seemed alien, like everything else around me. Every detail of the house Leon and I were building began to feel like part of someone else's life. The mirror in the hallway reflected a woman with a tired face. My voice sounded unnatural as I picked up the phone and answered the children's calls again and again, their calls bringing no comfort, only new questions and new demands. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," Davide said, and his voice betrayed the same impatience he'd shown in his youth, when he demanded money from me. Only now, at 32, he wasn't asking. He was presenting it as a fact. I set my mug down on the table without taking a single sip, and trying to control my trembling, replied, "Good morning to you too, David." But he didn't hear me, as always, and continued speaking in his confident tone that once could have discouraged anyone. "Giovanna and I discussed your situation, and frankly, this can't go on. The house is too big for you alone, and the mortgage is crushing you." "There's no mortgage," I wanted to say calmly, but the words came out hoarsely, like a confession of a secret I'd never told anyone. Leon had paid off the debt 5 years ago, and I'd let the children believe otherwise because it was easier and because it raised fewer questions. His laughter came over the phone, cold and dismissive, completely different from my father's, for Leon always had warmth and tenderness, while David had a gun. "Mom, please," he said. "Father's pension barely covered even the cost of medication, and we all understand your financial situation." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden we'd tended for 23 years. The roses needed pruning, the herb beds were overgrown, and all of this, which had once brought joy and a sense of belonging, now served only as a reminder of what I'd lost. "Your concern is touching," I said, and in the reflection of the glass I saw a woman with gray hair that long needed a touch-up, a face where new lines had deepened in the space of a month, and in these features I suddenly didn't recognize myself. 63 years old, and all of this looked back at me like someone else's story. "Don't be dramatic, Mom." Beatrice agrees with me. "We think you should consider moving in with one of us," David continued. I turned away from the window abruptly. Beatrice hadn't called since the funeral, hadn't picked up when I called, and now it suddenly seemed she'd managed to express an opinion about where and how I should live. "When exactly did she say that?" I asked, and imagined David habitually running his hand through his thinning hair, mimicking Leon's gesture. "Last night, at family dinner, we discussed your options," he replied. "Options?" To them, I sounded like a problem requiring an immediate solution, not like someone who'd lost her husband and was struggling to cope with the emptiness. I opened the refrigerator and saw neatly arranged casseroles, still untouched, gifts from neighbors, full of thought, but tasteless without Leon. "And your options include selling the house?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Davide didn't even hesitate. "That would make sense. You could help Giovanna and me with the down payment on the house we found on Maple Street, and Beatrice could use some help with the fund for Laura. It's a win-win situation." I slammed the refrigerator door so hard the pans inside rattled. A win-win situation, for them, but not for me. "You know that's not what I meant," Davide softened, but I knew it was exactly what he meant. He was always straightforward in his selfishness, and at least there was honesty in that, unlike Beatrice, who could ask in such a way that I felt guilty for what she didn't say out loud. "What did you tell your sister about my affairs?" I asked. "Only the truth, that my father's pension wouldn't be enough, that the house is too big, that you probably suffer more than you let on." The truth. He didn't know the slightest detail about our real life, about what Leon and I had saved, about his investments, about the inheritance from his mother-in-law that we had carefully accumulated. I thought about the folder in his desk drawer, the same one I'd found while sorting through papers after the funeral. It contained bank statements, briefcases, documents for the house in Marbella Leon had secretly bought for us. He'd shown me photos just 6 months before his heart had betrayed him, telling me we'd watch sunsets and drink wine there, and no one would ask any questions. "I'll think about it," I finally said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though inside I was seething like a kettle forgotten on the stove. "Mom," David interrupted, "we're not asking you to think about it. We're telling you what needs to happen. Giovanna has already found a buyer. Her cousin Matteo is in real estate and has a very interested client. Cash offer, fast closing, start packing." I felt my fingers grip the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Have you found a buyer for my house?" I said, pausing, as if each word were a lump of ice in my mouth. "We're trying to help you, Mom. The sooner you realize this is the best decision for everyone, the easier this transition will be." Transition. How cynical that word sounded, as if grief could be equated with a merger, and 30 years of marriage and life together were reduced to business paperwork and profit. "And where am I supposed to live during this transition of yours?" I asked, feeling my own breathing grow heavy. "That's exactly what we wanted to discuss." "Beatrice has a finished basement. Since she goes away to college most of the year, there's plenty of space. You'll have your own entrance, your own bathroom. This could work out perfectly." The basement. The same basement in Beatrice's house, which flooded every spring with meltwater, and where boxes of Christmas decorations and exercise equipment she never used sat amid the dust. The same basement where I'd been sent last Thanksgiving while the adults were eating dinner upstairs, and I'd sat there alone, listening to the hum of their voices and the clinking of glasses, like an invited but unwanted guest in my own family. How generous of her to offer me this basement, like alms. "She's honestly thrilled," David continued. "She thinks it could be useful for both of you. You could help with Laura when she gets home from school, maybe cook a little. You know how Beatrice always had trouble planning meals." I couldn't help but grin. The hassle of food, laundry, cleaning, the obligation to call her mother at least occasionally. She had no problem leaving all this on other people's shoulders, especially mine. The same shoulders that had once supported her as a child when she took her first steps, the same shoulders that always took her tears. "And you, Davida," I asked, "what role do you play in this agreement?" His answer sounded predictable. "Giovanna and I will handle the sale, the paperwork, the negotiations. We'll make sure you get a fair price." I barely suppressed a bitter laugh. Justice with David was always like a game at a fairground shooting gallery, designed so that the shooter inevitably loses. "I need to think about it," I repeated stubbornly. "Mom, there's nothing to think about," he insisted. "Matteo's client is serious. They want to close the deal within a month. A month. I had 1 month left to destroy the entire life Leon and I had built together, to abandon the walls where laughter echoed at children's birthday parties, where balloons hung at graduations, where I wiped foreheads with a wet rag when the children were sick with chickenpox, where Leon and I experienced crises, fought and made up, where I felt part of something real. I said, "I need to think," I snapped. "Okay, but don't drag it out." Good opportunities don't wait forever, and the line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, clutching the phone, listening to the silence that covered the house like a heavy dome, as if even the air understood that it no longer belonged to me. Somewhere outside the window, a neighbor's dog barked, a car door slammed, and life around me went on as usual while mine was crumbling. I walked slowly to Leon's office, to his desk, where for years he'd paid bills, drawn up plans, filed paperwork, and plotted our future. The folder was still there, tucked under old tax returns. I pulled it out and spread the contents out on the scratched desk we'd bought at a garage sale when David was still in school. In front of me lay bank statements with sums that would make my children's eyes widen as if they were seeing the ocean for the first time. Next to them were investment portfolios that had weathered more than one market storm and only grown stronger. And then there were the deeds for a villa in Spain, with photographs of whitewashed walls and a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. Leon had always been a quiet man, not fond of big words, methodical in his plans and cautious in his actions. He never boasted about our savings, never flaunted our security. "Let them think we're in trouble," he said once when David asked for money yet again. "It builds character." At the time, I thought he was being overly strict, but now I realized it was wisdom. My phone vibrated. A message from Beatrice. "Mom, David told me about the house. I know it's hard, but it's for the best. Laura is so glad Grandma will be here. I can't wait to discuss the details. Laura, my granddaughter, who spent the summer with us, learning to bake cookies in this kitchen and planting tomatoes in the garden, who called every week during her first semester of college, homesick and finding solace in talking to me. When was the last time she called? 2 months ago? 3? I scrolled through my phone for messages and found nothing personal, just a group Christmas greeting thanking everyone for the gifts. Not a word to me, no questions, no requests for advice, no revelations about her studies or her boyfriend, no plans for the summer. Silence fell over the house like a heavy blanket, and I suddenly realized they had all moved on. For them, Leon's death had been an inconvenience that required organization, not grief. And I had become another inconvenience, a problem to be solved for their comfort. I folded the papers back into the folder, carefully returned it to the drawer, and went up to the bedroom. Leon's clothes hung in the closet, still lingering with the faint scent of his aftershave. I reached for the top shelf, pulled out my suitcase, and placed it on the bed. It was time to start packing, but not at all as David expected. The law office smelled of leather and old paper, and this scent, unexpectedly warm and dry, reminded me so much of Leon's office, where his leather briefcase always stood, and the bills and neatly folded documents smelled of ink. But now, sitting across from Ornella Russo, a probate lawyer, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her thick hair, and a gaze that seemed to see right through every detail, I felt not weaker, but stronger, as if someone had lifted an invisible burden from my shoulders. She laid out neat stacks of papers on the mahogany desk, each page looking stern, official, and beyond doubt. "Mrs. Fantozzi," Ornella said, "I must admit this is highly unusual. Your husband detailed the terms, but I never imagined I'd have to implement them." I smoothed my black dress, the same one I'd worn at the funeral, and trying to keep my voice even, said, "Leon always said I underestimated people's tendency towards selfishness. It seems he saw what I didn't want to see." Ornella nodded, slowly running her fingers along the edge of the document as if testing its strength. "The revocable trust he established gives you complete control over all assets. The children were never named as beneficiaries of the property, only the life insurance policy. Everything else, the house, the investments, the property in Spain, is entirely yours." The word Spain sounded like a promise of freedom. I looked up. "They don't know?" I asked, and Ornella smiled faintly. According to Leon's instructions, information about the foreign property was to be shared only with you and only 30 days after his death. He planned to put pressure on you, suspecting that his children might rush you into making decisions. Pressure. What an understatement for what I'd experienced. I'd heard David's voice yesterday, harsh and demanding, treating me not as the woman who gave birth to him, but as an unreasonable child incapable of managing her own affairs. "They've agreed to sell the house," I said, barely keeping the tremor in my voice. "Can it be stopped?" Ornella looked up from the papers. "You are the sole owner. Without your signature, the sale is impossible. If someone promised a buyer a deal, then they were operating under false assumptions. Her smile was subtle but confident. Leon made it very clear that he wants to protect your independence. I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in weeks, as if a tight knot of anxiety was beginning to dissolve. And the Spanish property, she continued, is fully paid for and legally yours. The management company Leon has contracted with sends monthly reports. The house is in good condition, ready for sale or occupancy, as soon as you decide. When you decide. These words struck a chord. When was the last time someone told me about choice, not necessity? Ornella pulled out another folder. There's something else. Leon left a letter to be delivered to you exactly 1 month after his death. Today is that day. She handed me an envelope the color of baked milk, and my name was written on it in Leon's neat, recognizable handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened the paper, and in the sterile silence of the office, his voice suddenly echoed within me. My dear Raymonda, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here, and you're left to deal with the consequences alone. I know our children. We love them, but I'm almost certain they're already circling like vultures, thinking they know better than you what you need. But that's not true. You're not a burden or a problem. You're a smart, strong woman who raised our children, supported me through every change, and managed our household with wisdom and grace for 30 years. Don't let them convince you otherwise. I could hardly breathe as I read on. The money and property are yours. Do with them as you wish. Keep them, sell them, give them away, but make your own choices, based on what you want, not on the expectations of others. I've seen you put your family above yourself for decades, giving up your own dreams. Now it's your turn. Go to Spain. Travel, write that novel you once talked about. Live for yourself. Our children will survive without your sacrifices, and perhaps even become stronger. At the end, he signed, with love and faith in your strength, your Leon. P.S. I left the key to the Spanish house in my desk behind the photograph of us in Venice. Mrs. Buonarroti next door will look after the garden. She speaks perfect English. I reread the letter over and over, my vision blurring, as if through tears I watched his hand writing each word. He knew. He understood what I didn't want to admit. Our children had become accustomed to my love as a resource to be used, not as a gift to be cherished. Are you okay? Ornella asked softly. I carefully folded the letter and said, I'm feeling better than I have in weeks. Tell me what I need to do to transfer ownership of the house into my name alone. She looked slightly surprised. It's already registered exclusively in your name. Leon changed the documents 3 years ago after David tried to convince him to invest in the restaurant. He then cut the children off from all ownership rights. The restaurant. I remembered that night. The heated arguments, David's angry eyes, his accusations that his father didn't believe in his abilities. Back then, I thought Leon was too harsh. Now I realized he was insightful. There's one more thing, Ornella said, pulling out a small envelope. Leon asked me to give you this bank card and the code. He called the account your Independence Fund. He opened it last year and regularly added to it. The card lay in my palm like a cold rectangle, but I felt its weight, like a symbol of new life. How much? I whispered. $50,000, Ornella answered calmly. He put money into it every month, saying that someday Raymonda would decide to live for herself. $50,000, a sum I hadn't even suspected, hidden in the shadows of his silent care, carefully tucked away from pension payments and investment dividends, while I sat with an expense book on the kitchen table, scribbling down every line item, making sure we had enough for everything we needed, unaware of the secret fund for my future freedom lurking nearby. This wasn't money for security, not insurance against illness or disaster, but precisely for freedom, so that, when the time came, I could decide for myself. I left Ornella's office with a briefcase full of documents and an unexpected lightness in my chest. the likes of which I hadn't felt since the moment Leon's heart fell silent forever. The house was mine. The villa in Spain was mine. The investments were mine. And most importantly, the choice of what to do with it all was mine alone. A warm breeze blew outside, and as I clutched the papers to myself, I suddenly realized, for the first time in many years, I did not have to answer to the children or to anyone's expectations. The phone rang as I approached the car. Beatrice's name lit up the screen, and I felt a wave of weariness rise in my chest again. "Mom, I'm so glad I caught you." Her voice sounded too animated to be sincere. "I wanted to discuss renovating the basement. Giovanna knows a contractor who could convert it into a kitchen. We could make a separate entrance. It would be like your little apartment." I unlocked the car but didn't get in, lingering with the keys in my hand. "How thoughtful," I said, though my voice sounded colder than I expected. "I know you're worried about the cost," she continued, oblivious to her tone. "But David and I decided to deduct everything from the sale of the house. Think of it as an investment in your comfort. Comfort." The word stung like a needle. Their concern for my comfort made me sound like I wasn't a person but an old dog being rehoused. I sighed and asked, "Beatrice, when was the last time you just called me? To ask how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, how my day is going? When did you miss talking to Mom? Not when you needed something." There was a pause, tense and awkward. "Mom, it's not fair," she finally replied. "I have so much on my plate. I've been managing Laura's college expenses. Work is busy." I leaned against the car door, watching people go by, busy with their Thursday chores, and asked, "Tell me about Laura's expenses." "Tuition costs $28,000 a year, plus housing, food, books, sorority dues," she listed in a dry voice. I interrupted. "Beatrice, I've been sending Laura $500 a month for 2 years. That's $12,000. Have you told her that?" There was silence. I could almost hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "She knows you're helping," my daughter said. "Does she know the amount?" "That it's my pension and not some fund she's thinking about?" I insisted. Another pause, longer than the last. "I don't see why it matters," she finally exhaled. I closed my eyes, feeling a chill in my stomach. "She doesn't know, does she? Does she think her mother is the one footing the bill, sacrificing for her education, while her grandmother just stands by? Mom, you're making things more complicated." "Really? Or am I finally beginning to understand how simple it all is?" I said and hung up. My hands were shaking, but this time not from grief, from anger. Pure, burning anger, as if I'd woken up from a long sleep in which I'd allowed myself to be controlled. At home, the first thing I did was go to Leon's desk. There, behind a photo of us laughing in Venice on our 25th anniversary, lay a small brass key with a Spanish flag pendant. It seemed to be waiting for me to touch it. Next to it lay a photograph of Leon and me, laughing, free. I looked younger not because my face was less wrinkled, but because I was genuinely happy. My phone vibrated again, a message from David. "Mom, Matteo needs an answer by tomorrow. His client is losing patience. Don't ruin this for us all." I deleted it without even reading it and opened my laptop. 20 minutes later, I found the property management company's website, and 10 minutes later, I wrote a letter to Mrs. Buonarroti. "Dear Mrs. Buonarroti, my name is Raimonda Fantozzi, and I'm Leon's widow. I understand you were looking after our house in Spain. I'm planning to come and stay there soon. Please let me know what arrangements I need. Thank you for your kindness and care of our home during this difficult time. Sincerely, Raimonda Fantozzi." I hit send before I could even doubt it. Then I took out the suitcase I'd already prepared yesterday and began packing. But first, I glanced into David's room, where he'd lived as a boy. Trophies, school papers, a baseball glove given to me by Leon. Everything was neatly packed and labeled. Halfway to Beatrice's room, I heard a ringing sound. An international number. "Mrs. Fantozzi, this is Par Buonarroti. I received your letter and am deeply sorry for your loss. Leon often spoke of you. Her voice was warm, slightly accented, and my heart sank. "Thank you, Mrs. Buonarroti. I'm thinking of coming to Spain soon." "No problem at all. The house is ready. I check it every week. The garden is beautiful. Leon will be delighted. It's so good that you're coming. When were you planning on coming?" I glanced at the boxes of memories I'd been preparing for the children, who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. "Next week," I said firmly. "I'd like to come next week." The truck arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, just as the first rays of sun were beginning to paint the roofs of the neighboring houses golden. And it was at that moment that I heard David's car pull into the driveway, as steady and confident as its owner himself, and my heart immediately responded with that familiar, heavy feeling I'd long ago learned to recognize in his gait, his expression, his barely contained irritation, always ready to burst forth. I stood by the bedroom window and looked down, watching my son emerge from the car, carefully adjusting the lapels of his yellow suit, the very one Giovanna had once chosen for him for job interviews, as if to emphasize his ambition and brilliance, and clutching a thick fabric folder which I was sure contained the house sale documents, the papers that would finally seal the deal on my life as he imagined it. I noted to myself that the mover's arrival had been perfectly timed and precise, as if fate had decided to lend a special theatricality to my actions, and I even felt a little better about the coincidence. The people from the moving company acted with precision and efficiency. They were the kind of professionals who arrive precisely at the appointed time hour and do their job without question, and I felt grateful for their calm presence, which involuntarily gave me confidence as well. I hired them to haul away boxes of memories, everything that had once belonged to my children but no longer held any value to them, as well as several pieces of furniture they had insisted I keep for myself, but never bothered to take. Leon's leather chair, where he loved to read the newspapers in the mornings, my mother's antique dining table, where we had so many family gatherings, the piano that Beatrice had begged Leon and me for when she was a girl, then abandoned after 6 months of lazy studying. "Madam, where exactly should I deliver these boxes?" asked the lead mover, a sturdy man with a tired but kindly face, and I couldn't help but smile when I noticed his name on his name tag, Buonarroti, a coincidence that seemed to me like a small, playful gesture from Leon. "The first set is at 247 Maple Street," I said, handing him David's address, neatly written on a piece of paper. "The second is at 892 Pine Avenue at Beatrice's. Ring the doorbell and tell them these are gifts from Raimonda Fantozzi. They're memories they might want to cherish." He nodded professionally, but I noticed a faint hint of a smile flickering at the corners of his lips. 20 years in the moving business had probably made him witness to many family dramas, and he undoubtedly recognized a familiar face in mine. David's sharp knock on the door interrupted my instructions, and I took a deep breath before heading downstairs. I opened the door to him wearing a red dress, the very one Leon always said made my eyes shine. My hair was done up, and I looked nothing like the depressed widow I knew my son wanted to see, to help him manage her decisions. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His words came out almost like a scream. "Why is there a moving truck parked in your yard?" "Good morning, David," I answered calmly, though excitement raged inside me. "I'm moving some things." He almost forced his way past me into the hallway, glancing back at the boxes labeled with his name, his face gradually flushing. The same expression I'd seen on him as a teenager when he'd tried to hide a lie but collapsed under the weight of his own words. "These are my things," he said sharply, "things from my childhood." "Why are you packing them?" "I thought you'd find them useful," I replied guardedly. "Memories are precious, aren't they?" He jerked his head back as if my words had burned him, and I saw the tension in his eyes that had long since become a familiar mask. "Mom, we need to talk. Client Mateo is ready to make an offer. We need your signature today." I slammed the door and leaned calmly against it, watching him pace my hallway like a caged animal. "David, sit down," I said evenly. "I don't want to sit down," he countered irritably. "I want to know why you're acting so strange. First, you haven't answered my calls for 3 days, and now there's a truck at the house. Sit down," I repeated, and there was something in my voice that didn't allow for argument. He froze, as if an invisible hand had grabbed him by the shoulders and slowly sank to the bottom step of the stairs. The folder remained in his hands, clutched tightly, as if it were a shield protecting him from the truth. "Tell me," I said, looking him straight in the face, "where exactly did you promise your client, Mateo, that the money from the sale of this house would go?" "What do you mean?" he asked, but I noticed his jaw tense. "I mean, did you tell them the proceeds would be split between you and Beatrice? Did you calculate how much each of you would receive after that mysterious mortgage you were so concerned about was written off?" He turned away, and I knew I'd hit the nail on the head. "Mother, you're not thinking clearly," he said forcefully. "Grief has clouded your judgment." "No, David," I said firmly. "My mind is clearer than ever." I walked over to Leon's chair, which the movers were just about to carry out, and resting my hand on the back, continued, "Let me ask you one more question. When you and Beatrice discussed my situation, did you ever ask how I've been feeling since your father's death? Did you ask if I was sleeping at night, if I had the energy to live, if I just wanted to talk to someone so I wouldn't feel so alone?" He sat silently, the folder in his hands creaking with tension. Or was that entire dinner dedicated solely to how to profit from Leon's death? I pulled out my phone, opened the calculator, and quickly punched in the numbers. "Here, let's look at it together. If you sell the house for $350,000, as Mateo suggests, after deducting your expenses, you'll each receive $160,000. Am I right?" The blood drained from his face, and I knew the blow had been accurate. "David, do you even know how much your father actually left me each month?" I asked quietly. "I don't understand what that has to do with $4,200 a month, plus Social Security and investment dividends you don't even know about. Now tell me again why I can't afford to keep this house." He stood up abruptly, and the folder slipped from his hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud. "You lied to us." "No, David," I said calmly. "I allowed you to assume without challenging your assumptions. That's not a lie. It's your expectations, which you yourself have managed." He clenched his fists. "You wanted us to think you were having a hard time." "No, you wanted to think that," I replied, "because then it was easier for you to treat me like a burden rather than like a person." The engine of a truck rumbled outside the window, and I saw two men carefully lifting Leon's chair into the back of the truck. David turned to me and whispered almost desperately, "If you don't need the money, then why bother?" I looked up and looked directly at him. "I'm just doing exactly what you asked, David." "You wanted me to move out. I'm moving out. You wanted my things sorted out. I'm sorting them out." I leaned over, picked up the folder of documents, and flipped through the pages with Mateo's company logo. "There's just one problem," I said, clutching the papers in my hands. "This isn't your business, David. This is my life." He reached for the folder, but I confidently pushed it away. His voice trembled. "Mom, be reasonable. We can work this out. Maybe you won't even have to move in with Beatrice. We could find you a nice apartment. Something more acceptable." "More acceptable for whom?" I asked, my voice so even that I surprised myself, but within that evenness lay a sharp edge that cut the air like a thin blade. The question hung between us in a heavy pause, and David seemed to choke on his own words. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, trying to find a way to phrase it that wouldn't become another accusation, but the words were slow to come. At that moment, my phone rang, and Beatrice's name appeared on the screen. "Answer," I said firmly. "Put me on speakerphone." David shook his head, but without waiting for his consent, I pressed the screen myself and activated speakerphone. My daughter's voice burst into the room, sharp as a slap. "Mom, what's this madness? A truck is coming. Some men are trying to smuggle a piano into my house that I don't have room for." "Hello, Beatrice," I said calmly. "The piano you begged for when you were 8. I thought you'd want it back." "I don't want it back," she exclaimed, irritated. "I don't have room for a piano. And David just called me with this crazy idea that you're not selling the house." "The house is not for sale," I said slowly, letting the words fill the space between us. There was a silence on the other end of the line, so thick I could hear my own breathing. "What do you mean it's not for sale?" she finally asked, her voice sounding impatient. I mean exactly what I said. This is my house. Leon left it to me, and I'm not selling it. But David said you couldn't afford it. David was wrong about a lot of things, I snapped. There was another silence, even heavier than before, and when Beatrice finally spoke again, her voice had regained the sharpness I remembered from her teenage years, when she took any disagreement as an insult. Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but people are counting on this sale. I already told Laura she'll have her own bedroom in my house when you move in. My granddaughter's name hit me like ice water. I looked at David. His face had gone pale. Tell me about Laura, I said slowly. When did she last call me? I don't monitor her calls, Beatrice muttered, and I heard that old evasiveness in her voice that always appeared when she had nothing to say. I'll tell you myself, I continued. The last time she called me was December 15th during Christmas break. She wanted to know if I'd send her money for spring break. I went to the window and saw the movers carefully securing Leon's chair to the cart, and my voice trembled, though I tried to keep it together. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't mention missing Grandpa, she just needed the money. Mom, Beatrice interjected, Laura's in college. They're all too self-absorbed at that age. Really? I interrupted coldly. Or did she realize, watching her mother, that grandmothers exist only to provide financial support, expecting no warmth or affection in return? That's not true. You're twisting everything, Beatrice flared. How much money have I sent Laura over the last 2 years? I asked, keeping my voice low. There was no answer. $12,000, I said, $500 a month directly into her account. I turned sharply to David, who stood there with his mouth slightly open, as if hearing about it for the first time. The money you, Beatrice, never mentioned to your brother when you claimed I was having financial difficulties. To Laura, it looked like your sacrifice, but in reality, it was my love. You send her money every month? David whispered. Yes, I answered firmly, because I love my granddaughter and want her to succeed. But love shouldn't be invisible, David. Support shouldn't be secret. When did my family decide that the value of my contribution depended on whether it could be hidden? Beatrice's trembling voice came over the speaker. Mom, be quiet. We never meant. Yes, we did, I interrupted her. That's exactly what we meant. You wanted my resources without my presence, my money without my opinion, my compliance without my independence. I hung up without waiting for an argument and looked at David. The truck will be at your house in 30 minutes, I said. I advise you to make room for your childhood memories. Mom, please! He raised his hands in a pleading gesture. We can fix this. How? I asked. He froze, as if the question had ripped all the air out of him. I saw him frantically searching for the right words, the magic phrase that would restore his access to my resources without requiring sincere respect or true intimacy. We could have dinner together, the whole family, he finally managed to say. Talk about what you really want. What do I really want? I laughed, and the laughter sounded unexpected even to me, as if liberated after years of imprisonment. I want to live the rest of my life among people who see me as a woman, not a wallet. I want to wake up in the morning without wondering which of my children will reach out for money today. I want people to wait for me not for the money, but for my company. A truck started outside. David stood up, documents spilling from his folder and scattering across the floor. Where are you going? He asked, and for the first time in a long time, confusion crept into his voice. I smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen in months. Somewhere warm, I said. He bent down, hastily gathering up the papers, his movements awkward and desperate. Mom, you can't just disappear, he muttered. We're your family. Right? He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw in him the same little boy who once crawled into my lap after nightmares, needing bandages for scraped knees and bedtime stories to ward off the darkness. But the moment passed, and he straightened, pulling his adult mask back on. When will you be back? I opened the front door, letting in the morning sunlight and the sound of a truck pulling away. I'll let you know, I said. The flight to Madrid lasted 13 hours, filled with a rare, almost crystal-clear clarity. I sat by the window, the same spot Leon always chose, watching the Atlantic stretch below like an endless promise. The woman next to me, a talkative retiree from Phoenix flying to visit her daughter, tried to talk to me during takeoff, but something in my face must have stopped her. I wasn't up for small talk or casual revelations. I was too busy enjoying the silence of my own phone for the first time in years. For 3 days after David left my house, the phone never stopped ringing. He called, then Beatrice, then even Giovanna, who in her 5 years of marriage to my son had never once seen fit to call me herself, but now suddenly decided to take the initiative. My voicemail filled with messages that began with cautious apologies, sounding forced and alien, and then grew increasingly shrill and desperate, as if they were trying with all their might to wring even the tiniest response from me. "Mom, I think we've had a misunderstanding," David's voice said, and I could hear him choking on the unfamiliar gentleness. "Raimonda, it's Giovanna," she said with strained politeness. "David is very upset, and I think we should just talk." "Mom," Beatrice said, her voice thin but tense, like a string about to snap. "Laura's asking questions about money, and I don't know what to tell her." And then her tone changed abruptly, and the final message became almost mocking. "Okay, Mom. Want to play games? Two can play at this game. Don't expect us to come running to you when you realize how lonely you are." These words, spoken with the intention of hurting me, unexpectedly brought the opposite. I suddenly felt something important crystallizing within me. What should have been a threat felt like liberation, like confirmation that I had taken the right step. I turned off my phone that evening and haven't turned it on since, enjoying the ringing silence, free of reproaches, requests, or hidden manipulations. At customs in Madrid, a young woman with surprisingly soft eyes met me, and after stamping my passport, she asked the usual question, "Purpose of visit?" "To start all over again," I replied, and her smile, simple and bright, was the first sincere smile I'd received from anyone under 40 in many months. "Welcome to Spain, Senora," she said, and these words sounded like a blessing to me. Par Buonarroti was waiting for me in the arrivals area. She was a compact woman with silver hair neatly pulled back into a bun and eyes that sparkled with a warm light whenever she smiled. She held a small sign with my name written in neat handwriting. "Mrs. Fantozzi, welcome," she said in English with a soft, almost musical accent, and immediately hugged me as if we were old friends. Unexpectedly, I returned the hug with warm gratitude, and we were both slightly surprised. "How was your flight?" she asked solicitously. "Are you tired? Hungry, perhaps? The house is ready. I've prepared some food, just the basics, until you can do your own shopping." Her English was so good that I almost forgot I was in another country, and the musical notes of her accent made every sentence soft as a song. As we walked to her little Renault, she chattered incessantly about the weather, the neighborhood, the garden she'd been tending all this time. "Leon was so proud of this house," she said as we drove through the narrow streets of Marbella, where the houses huddled together with their white facades. He showed me photos on his phone. "My Raimonda will love the kitchen here," he said. "It will make her sing again." I bit my lip, afraid my voice would betray my excitement. Leon was talking about me here, this woman I was seeing for the first time, sharing with her his dreams of a future we would never have together. But somehow his words came alive, and I felt that reality still belonged to the two of us. The house struck me at first glance, smaller than ours in America, but the proportions were perfect, as if it had been built with soul in mind, not for show. The whitewashed walls shone in the sunlight, the blue shutters reflected the sky, and lush bougainvillea overspread the garden walls, spilling a purple flame. A stone path led to the door, lined with trees laden with lemons, oranges, and pink pomegranates. "How beautiful," I whispered, my heart aching with both tenderness and bitterness. "Leon was choosing," Par said softly, taking a copper key from her purse. "Come, I'll show you what's inside." The interior was cool and light. Terracotta tiles underfoot, white walls, wide windows opening onto the terrace and the sea. The furniture was simple, A cream-colored sofa, a wooden table for four, built-in shelves waiting for books. Copper pots hung in the kitchen, and the blue and white tiled countertops seemed to reflect the Mediterranean. "I've already stocked the refrigerator with the essentials," Parr said, opening the door. "There's bread, cheese, some fruit, a bottle of wine. You're resting tonight. Tomorrow we'll explore the countryside together." I nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness of this woman who owed me nothing, yet cared for me and my husband's dream as if it were her own. "Parr, I can't thank you enough," I said quietly. "No need for thanks," she smiled. "We're neighbors now." In Spain, neighbors are family. She gestured out the window where a similar house stood 50 yards away. "I live there. If you need anything, just call." Leon asked me to take care of you, and I promised. When she left, I was alone in the Spanish kitchen, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep, genuine peace. I slowly unpacked, hung clothes in the closet, placed Leon's photograph on the bedside table, and arranged small items in the bathroom with its sea-facing window. Every action was filled with meaning, every movement with awareness, unlike the rush of packing for David and Beatrice. As the sun sank toward the horizon, I poured myself a glass of the wine Parr had left behind and stepped out onto the terrace. The sea stretched out before me, shimmering with gold and coral, and sailboats in the distance bobbed like white prayers carried by the wind. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks mingled with the beating of my heart, and in that moment I knew I was finally where I was meant to be. My phone, forgotten in my purse, suddenly came to life and rang insistently, as if refusing to accept silence as an answer. I almost considered ignoring the call, having successfully avoided all contact for the last 4 days, enjoying the silence and freedom from everyone's expectations, but something inside me made me take it out and look at the screen. The caller's name made my heart skip a beat. Laura, my granddaughter, the one who hadn't called me since Christmas, was suddenly speaking to me. I let it ring 3 times and only answered on the 4th, as if testing myself to see if I was ready to hear her voice. "Grandma, oh my God, finally!" she exclaimed, her tone laced with a hurried, almost anxious urgency. "I've been trying to contact you for days." I felt the change immediately. It wasn't the lazy tone of a spoiled girl, convinced the whole world owed her attention. No, her voice was different, clear, purposeful, filled with something real. "Hi, Laura," I said softly. "Grandma, where are you?" she asked quickly, almost demandingly. "Mom won't tell me anything. She just keeps telling me you had some kind of fight with her and Uncle David, that you disappeared, and then there's this weird story about the house sale that fell through." "Laura, slow down," I asked, sinking into one of the chairs on the terrace and watching the last rays of sun fade over the horizon. "I can't slow down," she almost screamed. "I'm furious. Do you know what I found out yesterday? Do you know what Mom told me?" "What did she tell you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She said you sent me money for college for 2 years, $500 every month." Her words were thick with indignation and pain, and she said it as if she bore an unbearable burden that she hid from me to protect. "But Grandma—" Her voice wavered, and that tremor pierced me deeper than any reproach. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I know?" I took a deep breath, feeling her pain reflected in mine. "Your mother thought it was best," I answered quietly. "Better for whom?" Laura exclaimed. "Better for her, so she could take out a loan to pay for my education and look like a heroine? Better for Uncle David, so he could play up your poverty and pressure you into selling the house?" She burst into tears, and her sobs, echoing from the other side of the ocean, seemed to echo the sound of the waves beneath my terrace. "Grandma, I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed," she repeated through her tears. "Laura, you have nothing to be ashamed of," I said confidently. "Yes, you do," she objected. "I let them convince me you were just a sad old lady who needed to be taken care of. I stopped calling because Mom insisted you were too fragile and would get attached if I talked to you too much. She said it would be better for you to be alone and grieve, that it was healthier." I closed my eyes and inhaled the scent of lemons and salt water carried by the light Spanish breeze. "That's why I gave you space. Laura continued, her voice now laced with not just anger, but also strength. And all this time, you were paying for my textbooks, my trips, everything. And I didn't even thank you. I didn't even ask how you were living without Grandpa. Laura, I began, but she interrupted. And now they're telling everyone you've had a breakdown, that you've disappeared. But that's not true, is it? You're not having a breakdown, are you? You're just tired of their constant tirades. The unexpected curse in her voice made me smile for the first time in this conversation. Foul language, Laura, I said softly. Sorry. But am I right? I looked at the darkening sea, where the village lights were already flaring, and quietly replied, Yes, you're right. Where are you? She asked. In Spain, I said. In Spain? Her voice changed, the surprise instantly giving way to anger. Like Spain? Your grandfather bought a house here for our retirement. Right now I'm sitting on the terrace, looking out over the Mediterranean. A long pause, then a quiet question. Is it beautiful here? This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen, I replied. Grandma, I need to say something. I need to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for, dear. You were deceived by those you trusted. It's not your fault. But I should have known, she insisted. I should have called more often, asked questions. Laura, I interrupted, standing and pacing the terrace where the first stars were already lit above my head. You're 20 years old. Your job now is to learn, grow, and figure out who you want to be. It's not your job to manage the family finances and unravel other people's schemes. But I want to be better, Grandma. I want to be better. Then be better, I said. Call me because you miss me, not because you need something. Come to me because you enjoy my company, not because you have to. Love me because I'm your grandmother, not because I pay your bills. There was a pause, then her timid voice. Can I come to you in Spain? The question caught me off guard. Laura, I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't care. I have spring break in 3 weeks. I can cancel this stupid trip to Cancun, which you probably paid for anyway, and come to you. I want to see Grandpa's dream house. I want to sit on the terrace and hear about your new life. Her words filled my chest with warmth. What will your mother say? I don't care what she says, Laura replied quickly, but then, after a moment, added more quietly, Actually, I do. But I won't let her words dictate my choices anymore. Her voice grew more and more confident. Grandma, I'm 20 years old and I suddenly realized I don't know you at all. I only know the version of you I've been shown. The grandmother who bakes cookies and sends birthday cards, and she needs to be handled with care. But you're not like that, are you? I thought of the woman who stood up to David in the hallway of her own home, who methodically shattered her children's illusions, who boarded a plane to Spain with no return date. No, Laura, I'm not like that at all, I said. Okay, she replied passionately. I can't wait to meet the real you. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the sound of the waves, and felt something new and unfamiliar stirring in my chest. For the first time in months, I looked forward to tomorrow, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. 3 weeks later, I stood by the glass doors of Malaga Airport, peering out at the stream of passengers disembarking, barely recognizing my granddaughter. Gone was the flawless college student I remembered from Christmas photos, where every strand of her perfectly straightened hair shone. Her makeup was meticulously chosen, and her outfit seemed chosen not for herself, but to gain approval in some cold social media space. A different Laura appeared before me. In faded jeans, a simple white t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, and a face stripped bare except for large sunglasses and a smile so genuine that it transformed her entire appearance that I was momentarily speechless. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, dropping her backpack and practically running toward me. Her embrace was so strong, so genuine, that it utterly devoid of the formal restraint I'd become accustomed to over years of family gatherings and celebrations. It was a hug, born of desperation and gratitude, a thirst for reality and truth, not habit. "Let me look at you," I said, pulling back slightly and holding her at arm's length. She seemed thinner to me, but something new, firm and confident, Something not there before had appeared in her face. "You look amazing," she said, studying my face intently, and added with genuine admiration, "Wow, simply amazing. Your tan, your hair. Did you get a haircut?" I instinctively touched the new haircut Par had talked me into at her small salon in town. "Just a little trim," I smiled. "Perfect," Laura said after a pause. You look like yourself." The drive to Marbella passed amidst her endless questions and enthusiastic exclamations. Laura pressed her face to the window, like a child enchanted by the world she was seeing for the first time. Olive groves, snow-white villages, ancient churches, manicured fields, everything delighted her. Her enthusiasm was so infectious that I imagined Leon sitting next to me again, raptly noticing every detail of our rare trips abroad. "There it is," I said as we pulled into the driveway. "Your grandfather's dream." Laura got out of the car and stood for a long moment in the garden, as if afraid to miss even a single moment. She gazed at the lush bougainvilleas, the lemon trees heavy with fruit, and the terrace where I spent hours with books, and the journal I'd begun keeping, allowing myself for the first time to honestly record my thoughts. Then she turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "He knew, didn't he?" she asked quietly. "He knew you'd need this particular place." "I think he knew," I replied, struggling to overcome the lump in my throat. That evening, we sat on the terrace, sharing the paella Par had insisted on making for Laura's arrival. My neighbor fussed over her as if she were her own granddaughter, and I watched in amazement as Laura responded with the same easy warmth she'd so missed with her parents. "Tell me about your life here," she asked, sitting down next to me as the sun was already setting. "I want to know everything." And I told her about my morning strolls through the village, where the shopkeepers already knew my name and memorized my tastes, about Spanish lessons with Miguel, the retired professor who lives down the street, about the book I'd started writing. Not the novel Leon had once begged me for, but a memoir, an honest account of marriage and motherhood, of the slow self-destruction that comes when love turns into service, and service into duty. "You're writing a book?" Laura's eyes widened. "Grandma, that's incredible. I didn't even know you wanted to write." I didn't know either until I found myself in the silence where I could finally hear my own thoughts, I admitted. She suddenly fell silent as if gathering her courage, and then said, "Mom called me yesterday." I tensed, but Laura raised her hand as if stopping my objections. "She tried to talk me out of it. She said you were having a breakdown and that seeing me would only make things worse. She called me selfish for coming here instead of spending the holidays with my family." "And what did you tell her?" I asked cautiously. "I said that maybe it was time for someone in our family to be selfish for you." Her voice took on a steeliness I'd never heard before. And then I asked her point blank, "If you're having a breakdown, why didn't any of them even come to you? Why didn't they call you directly instead of just discussing you as a problem to be solved?" "And what did she say?" "Nothing," Laura said, her face hardening. She couldn't answer because any honesty would expose them. "They don't care about your well-being. They care about access to your resources." The word should have hurt, but instead it sounded like a justification for everything I felt. "Laura, listen." I gently touched her hand. "I don't want you to choose sides. David and Beatrice are your family too." "No," she said firmly. "They chose a side when they used me as a weapon against you. When they allowed me to believe you were poor and helpless, when in reality you were secretly paying my bills, when they tried to isolate you from the people who could support you." She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Grandma, I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I realized they weren't just lying to you about your finances. They were lying to me about you." "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "They convinced me you were a frail old woman who needed to be protected from any kind of stress. They said that calling too often could make you dependent, that I should leave you alone to grieve. But it was never about caring. It was about controlling the story they told about you." I looked at her, amazed at her insight. "Laura," I said, "they wanted to isolate me so that I would accept their terms in desperation. And they wanted to distance you so you wouldn't see what they were doing to me." Her hands clenched into fists. And you know what's worst? It almost worked. I almost believed that image of a grandmother who could be left alone because it was more convenient. I smiled through my tears. But you didn't become that person. Only because you forced them to show their true faces, she said firmly. If you hadn't left, if you hadn't forced them to open up, I would still be living their lie. Laura shook her head, and there was so much unspoken pain and recognition in that simple movement that I had to clasp my hands in my lap to keep my balance. She said quietly, but with the firmness I'd come to recognize in her voice, I could live my whole life and never know who you really are. Those words struck a chord deep within me, one that had echoed for years, and I realized she was right. I'd lived in the shadow of others' perceptions of me for too long. We sat in comfortable silence, and there was no emptiness in that silence. It was filled with the breath of the sea, the scent of night flowers, and the gradual emergence of stars, one by one flaring up above our heads, as if confirming that this conversation was meant to happen now. Finally, Laura spoke again, her voice soft but determined. "Grandma, can I stay longer than a week?" I looked at her in surprise and asked, "What about school?" But Laura only nodded calmly. Before I left, I spoke with the teachers, and they allowed me to study independently for the rest of the semester, writing assignments and taking exams online. I just don't want to go back yet. I want to spend real time with you, time that isn't measured by vacation trips or phone calls with prearranged plans. I sighed and, trying to speak calmly, replied, "Laura, your education won't go anywhere. You can return to it when you're ready. But this chance, this time with me, really may never come again." She looked at me with eyes that suddenly flashed with Leon's expression, firm, decisive, and it made my heart ache. "Grandma, I'm 20 years old and I just realized that you and I have never had a real conversation. All my life, you were the person who remembered birthdays, sent packages, and brought your homemade desserts to family celebrations. But I don't know what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what you were like before you became a grandmother, and I want to know all of that." The next morning, Laura came with me on my usual stroll through the village. I watched her charm the baker with her tentative attempts at Spanish, help par in the garden, and listen with reverent attention to Miguel's stories about his years teaching literature at the University of Madrid. "Your grandmother, she has the soul of a writer," he said one day at Café Catalu, where I had become a regular. "She notices what others miss. She understands the significance of small things. She's always been like that," Laura added, and I noticed a new admiration creep into her gaze. I just never noticed it before. That same day, we went to a small beach I'd recently discovered, a secluded cove hidden among the pine trees and accessible only by a narrow, winding path. There, Laura spread a blanket on the sand, and I unpacked our modest lunch, packed that morning. She suddenly asked, almost in a whisper, "Grandma, can I ask you a personal question?" I looked up from my sandwiches. "Of course. Will you ever come back?" The question I'd been avoiding even in my own thoughts sounded too blunt. "I don't know," I admitted, "but you could stay here forever, legally. Leon has everything planned out. You have housing options, health insurance, everything you need." I handed her a sandwich and settled in next to her. "Why do you ask?" "Because, Grandma, I think you should stay." Her voice was surprisingly confident. She added, chewing on a piece of sandwich, "And I think you should let Mom and Uncle David figure out their own lives without expecting your sponsorship or approval. And also," she smiled thoughtfully, "I think I should transfer here to university." I almost dropped my tea mug. "What?" But Laura spoke enthusiastically. "There are American programs in Madrid, Barcelona, even Malaga. I could get a degree in international studies, become fluent in Spanish, discover a different way of life, or maybe take a sabbatical and work with Pilar in her pottery studio, help you with your book, and finally understand who I am if I'm not performing in public and playing someone else's role." "Laura, this is a very big decision," I said. She smiled. "Like deciding to get on a plane to Spain, like getting a haircut, like starting a book, like refusing to sell the house. I couldn't think of anything to say, and then she turned to face me. Grandma, my whole life I've made decisions based on the expectations of others, what my mother wanted, what my professors demanded, what my friends thought was appropriate. But now, sitting next to you, I feel like I'm beginning to see clearly for the first time. What do you see? I asked quietly. I see that you're not the frail old woman you were made out to be. You're the strongest person I know. And I realize I don't want to be the kind of person who abandons the one they love just for convenience. I want to be the kind of person who chooses truth over illusions, love over comfort. I covered my face with my hands. Laura, your mother will never forgive me if I let you ruin your life. But she grabbed my hands, and her grip was hot and confident. This isn't ruining my life, Grandma. It's saving it. I went through college like a sleepwalker, doing everything by the book because it felt right in the eyes of others. But now I'm awake, and I want to spend my awakening with someone who sees me as an individual, not as a project to manage. That evening, we called the university together and arranged for Laura to take a leave of absence. Then we called Par to inquire about an internship at the pottery studio. And finally, as the sun was setting and the sound of the waves filled the silences, Laura made one last call to her mother. I heard her voice. "Mom, it's Laura. I'm staying in Spain longer. No, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough. I'm 20 years old and I decide how to spend my time. In fact, Mom, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I choose my grandmother, because she's the only person in our family who has always seen me as an end, not a means." After finishing the call, she turned off the phone and looked at me. "Do you regret anything?" I asked. She smiled Leon's smile, filled with such quiet determination. "Just one thing. That it took me 20 years to figure out where I belong." And that night, as we sat together on my Spanish terrace and watched the stars light up over the Mediterranean, I realized that my story of loss had become a story of finding. I had lost the illusion of a family that demanded my submission and humiliation, but I had found a real family that valued my strength and truth. And for the first time since Leon's death, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving.